Okay, welcome everybody. This is both sides of the mic today. And if you didn't see the notice about it, we were supposed to have Steve Cotman today, but Steve is unavailable. So he's been rescheduled into September. So it's a mystery caller today, and it is actually nothing very mysterious about it. It's me. Uh, I didn't, I'd like to have more advertising or whatever for other callers rather than ask someone to fill in, last minute kind of a thing, so that we get all the fan clubs people on there. So as we go, if anybody else joins in, I'll one or the other of us. So click on here. So I did send out an email to everybody on my email list, at least, to see if they would have some questions just to ask me, and we'll just wing it from there. And if you don't have any questions, then I have some poetry I could read. Uh, I
Yeah, we'll go with that.
I could
Play a trumpet.
do some tap dancing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, why don't you start by giving us a quick bio, Joe? Like, how long you've been
Yeah.
calling and
okay.
how long you've been calling as compared to how long you've been any good at it.
Well, that's yet to come. I'm still practicing. Okay. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Well, I got into square dancing to start with when I first started teaching. I was teaching music up in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. Small school, about 1,200 kids total, kindergarten to grade 12. And the teachers there, because there weren't too many town folks, the teachers there would get together on a Friday night, or usually a Friday night or a Saturday, and they pretty much drank. I was not a drinker, even though I tended bar at a ski resort for to actually earn money instead of trying to, survive on a teacher's income. Uh, we were drinkers, so my one sister had been a square dancer in Rochester, New York area, and was kind of an advisor for a teen club and all, and they would try to get myself and my wife involved, and we just never did. And then, so my wife said, "Well, why don't we see if there's some square dancing around?" So she found some 10 miles away in a little town called Boonville. Unfortunately, it was a Tuesday night, and I was working on my master's degree, going down to Syracuse. So we called the contact anyhow and said, "Well, is there anything anywhere else?" He said, "Oh yeah, you could go down to Utica, 90 miles away." Well, we did. We were 4 lessons late, so they did the typical thing. They ran us through a half hour ahead of time, showed us everything everybody learned, and then the people got there. They performed their squares. We got in a square. The caller started calling, and everything went mush. It was like a right and left. What? Everything was courtesy turn, right and left, this hand, that. Anyhow, we stuck with it, and I was teaching. Like I said, I was teaching music at the time, and I did have this one class of kids, seventh grade, eighth grade, who were, um, I don't know, um, they had a learning problem. So anything you did, you had to do by rote. So you just over and over and over, and the kids didn't mind, but it wasn't tremendously. It just didn't seem like a lot of fun. So one day I said to the kids, I said, "Hey, how would I'm taking this square dance lessons, learning how to square dance. Would you want to learn how to do that?" Now, being like most people who take calling, I hadn't given it a thought that I didn't know how to call. That never entered my mind. And they all said, "Oh yeah, let's do it." Well, I asked my caller I said, well, how do you know how to call these things? Like, how do you get to the corner and all that? And he was a big guy, and he looked down at me and he says, zeros and equivalents. And the way he said it, I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. I had no idea what he was talking about. So I made little checkers up, for 8 dancers, and I labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So my corner box situation, it's 1, 6 looking at 7, 8. It's I thought you had to know where everybody was, and I started taping callers, and I would watch other callers teach a class and stuff like that. But I thought there might be a mathematical way to figure it out, like X number of star throughs equals a right and left through, and if you did enough right and left throughs, you could add them in left somehow. Uh, didn't work, but I practiced anyhow, and I mentally followed the dancers in my head. So I would keep adding calls as I could master one set of calls and take them from here to there and there. Anyhow, the kids got good. They got so good they learned club level, which is at that time it would equal our mainstream program. So I did a field trip. Took them to Rochester, New York, where my sister had the teen clubs. They were having a teen festival. For some of these kids, it's the first time they rode in an escalator. Um, it was a real eye opener because this is farm country, and these kids, a lot of them never really got to the city. So it worked out great. A good 20 years later or so, when I was running a square dance campground up in New York, nearby, it happened that a lot of these kids' parents had become square dancers, and they came out to the square dance sort of a thing, and it's a small world when it comes to that. So that's how I got started into both dancing and calling, and so I called in New York State. Um, I did it for the kids there for 3 years, and then I took a trip to Guam in the South Pacific, and I did another teen club there. When I came back to New York, um, I started another teen club, and then I started an adult club in a little city called Mechanicsville, New York, which is just north of Albany area. And inside of 2 years, I ended up calling for a dozen different clubs. I still didn't know what I was doing. I don't know if I do today, but I did go on one of my trips. I did go to the Dr. Lloyd Shaw's leader school. Didn't call it a caller school. It was a dance leader school. We did some calling, but they never explained choreography. I got to do one singing call, and then we did a lot of round dancing and contras and all that kind of stuff. Um, but once I got going in New York, I made some caller friends. I joined the Callers Association. They thought I was a caller, and so they sort of accepted me right away. And I watched a couple of callers there do their classes for a couple of years. And it was, a couple of them said, well, are you going to college school this summer? I said, well, where? And they said, well, Gloria and Johnny Roth have a college school up in Digby, Nova Scotia. And it's a lot of fun, and we go every year. So I said, yeah, I'll sign up. So I went up there, and they gave the terminology. They explained what a corner box was. They explained what partner lines were. And everything clicked choreography-wise. It was like the secret handshake, So from then on, choreography became easy. I think it was probably 1972 that I did full-time calling. It was either teaching or calling because I just couldn't keep up the schedule. I get up, I'd start school at 7. I get done around 4, then I get in the car, I stop at the house, get a sandwich, and drive to a dance or a class. And I was calling like a dozen different sessions a week. So the calling paid better, and it was a little more fun. There was no bureaucracy at the time. Not that I knew about it anyhow. And then it just grew from there. So I was apparently I was popular up along the East Coast quite a bit. I had clubs in Plattsburgh all the way down to Kingston, which would be about a 250-mile uh, trip from one to the other. So
Yeah,
a lot of driving.
can we go back to Guam for just a minute?
Oh, sure. But
So
Guam was
were you like in the forces and that's why you were in Guam?
no, no.
Oh, okay.
We had a an elementary advisor at the school I was teaching up in the hills, and he had taught in oil company schools in Africa, and they became friends of ours. And in talking about it, I said, "Wow, that sounds like fun." Well, first off, you got three times the pay. You only taught about 3.5 days a week because of the different religions. You got money to go for further education. You had house like you didn't do any housework or anything. It was just a great thing. So I applied to American Oil Company School. I got accepted, and in April of the first year I was supposed to go, they said the band leader has decided to stay one more year. That was fine. Then in '67 they had a short 6-day war, uh, the Arabs against the Jews, and they everybody had to leave the country. So we had done a kind of had a backup plan, and it had applied to Guam because it's just like another state as far as the education system went. We got accepted. So first class airfare to Guam, housing subsidy, living subsidy, the whole works. We got our income increased, I think, threefold, and no taxes. It was yeah, didn't have to pay tax. So I taught there, and
How long?
a couple of years. My, we probably would have stayed longer, but my mom had a major heart attack, and uh,
Oh,
we decided we had to go home for that, and because it might be her last days. It wasn't. She survived and did well for another quite a few years. But it changed our plans because originally I was going to start a business in Alaska, the only state I haven't called in. Um, and I don't know how these people ever got my name, but different people would contact me for different kinds of things. I had a couple from Europe that wanted us to be tutors to their two kids. Fantastic pay and everything, but I didn't think I could do that. Um, so anyhow, we came back to New York, and the rest was history from there. Uh, it's been a fun ride. It's been next year will be 60 years then that I've been trying to figure out how to do this calling thing. And if I ever figure it out, I'm going to let everybody know how it works. so so anybody got any particular questions? I got answers for some.
You used to do a lot of calling schools. Do you still have anything to do with that, or and what got you into teaching other callers? Just because of your teaching background?
Probably, yeah, probably because of the teaching background. I don't remember what really got me started. What made me think I could tell anybody else how to do it? Other than even when I was a kid, I looked at everything from a learning teaching perspective. Uh, I grew up. We weren't too. We were poor, is what it is. we, my dad was like I'm like my dad. Uh, I do what I like to do, and if the pay is survivable, fine. I keep on doing it. He was a motorcycle mechanic. Well, he was a farmer first, but he always was involved with machinery. So in the early 1900s, he built motorcycles and raced motorcycles. And so that's what I grew up knowing. And when I was about 4, I would start going on Saturdays with him to the shop, and he'd give me odd jobs like undoing the spokes on a wheel or sorting screws, that kind of thing. Something to keep the kid out of his hair. And of course, he was working on this little motorcycle for the boss's son, and every so often he'd have me sit on it to see if it was the right size. And I was so jealous because I thought, my dad's building the motorcycle and it's a boss's son, and I thought the boss's son was kind of weird, and he was. And plus, he was a whole lot bigger than me. I couldn't figure out how my dad figured out how this motorcycle was going to work for this kid. Yeah. And then when I turned 6, my dad couldn't wait for me to get up for my birthday. So he's yelling up the stairs, "Aren't you ever going to get up? It's your birthday." So you come down the stairs, you could peek around the corner and look through the kitchen into the living room. It was a small house. And there on a box sat that motorcycle. And so that was probably the best thing in my little childhood memories that happened. So I would do, exhibition rides and stunt riding on my little motorcycle at county fairs and different motorcycle meets. But from then on, I was building and racing motorcycles with my dad. He became hill climb champion in 1949. I quit in, I think it probably was 1959. It hurts more to keep going on a hill climb when you're doing motorcycle things. It hurts to try to keep on the motorcycle. And I didn't think that was a great thing to do anymore, so I quit trying to do that. But we did all kinds of things. Ice racing, we did sidecar stunts, and I remember one of them, I'd ride a coal shovel. He'd tow behind the motorcycle. We'd go around the track 3-4 times, and of course he'd zigzag and have me nearly crashing into the fences on the side, sort of a thing. But and then we did one, you leap through the fire, go up a big ramp and through a fiery hoop, sort of a thing. And that was back in the days when we didn't have much for suspension on motorcycles, so the trauma it's starting to catch up with me. after 80 years, something's catching up with me anyhow. So teaching wise, yeah, I guess my dad must have been a really good teacher because he taught me everything he knew. Well, I didn't learn everything he taught me, but he tried to teach me everything. And so I always looked at it from like, how could I get someone else to do this? What would I tell them? So that stuck with me all along. In fact, in later life here in Canada, because the distance is so great between clubs, you don't do a whole lot of driving. You're either going to fly if you're going to get somewhere or plan on a long trip. So at one point I went back to teaching school, lasted a year. They shut down the high school. And being the new kid on the block, they didn't have to find me a position. I had no tenure. So I came home and my wife Gail says, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't know what I could do. She said, no, not what can you do? What do you want to do? Is there something else different? The calling supplemented the income. That was good, but it wasn't enough at that point. So by that time, must have been 3-4 years into Canada, and I had fulfilled all my U.S. dates. And as I fulfilled them, I didn't renew very many of them. I kept some festivals and whatnot, but it's too much work to go across the border sometimes. So I said, well, we had met flying, and I love aviation. So I said, well, something to do maybe, because I love mechanics, mechanical things. Maybe something to do with flying airplanes and building airplanes, something like that. She said, well, research it. So a couple of kids I had in the 1 year in school, their father was the head of the flight department for Seneca College in Ontario, where it's the biggest pilot training university going in Canada. So I called this guy and I explained it, and he said, "Well, you ought to look into the avionics side." No, I didn't even know what avionics meant. It sounded like something I might be able to do. Turns out it was the electronics, and I thought, well, that's the one thing I know nothing about. You know, I know electrical, I know mechanical, but electronics, that was way out of my scope. So I thought, sounds like a plan. So I went back to school and for aviation engineering, majoring in the electronics portion of it. Uh, so at the time, I guess I was calling maybe 4 nights a week. Mostly, well, I had a mainstream club, advanced club, C1, C2, C3A, C3B. I guess I had five, must have been 5 nights a week I was calling. Um, but anyhow, I got out of school, went to work for Bombardier, building aircraft. And within 6 months, they put up a posting and they said, and it looked like they had copied my resume. They wanted someone with a university degree in education, someone who had adult training experience, someone who was a specialist in avionics, all this stuff. So I applied and I got the job in training. So I spent a number of years. And the thing is, being at the age I was 55 by then. No matter where I went, I looked like I belonged. So nobody minded if I wandered around the company. I could go from hangar to hangar and hang out, which was great. Then from there, I got lured off to Spire Aerospace and was director of education training there. And they had another fancy name for something to do with, oh man, what was it called? Organizational development. In other words, I was supposed to set up how how the whole place ran. I had no idea what I was doing again, but I did it, and that was fun. Anyhow, then they sold out to the U.S. I kept on calling. I was still calling for, I was calling for Toronto, the Triangle Squares, come to think of it. Triangle Squares is a gay club in Toronto. I did 30 years for them and taught the callers there, Andy Chong, Don St. Jean, quite a few people. Marge Cohen now is apparently doing quite well. And even before that, Barry Clasper came to one of my caller schools because he started out at the challenge level. And he said to me, he said, "Joe," he says, "I don't know how to call mainstream." He said, I need help because everything I call is too hard. So the idea of caller school just, I don't know. When I started running, I guess when I started running the Square Dance Campground up in Boonville, Rockies Recreation Area, I started doing caller schools there. Somebody must have asked me to do it. But I have no idea, no recollection as what gave me the idea that I had, two thoughts to rub together on how to do it. So I just copied what everybody else did. And we used to get anywhere from 15 to 20 callers twice a year. It's a caller school, and quite a few different callers across the states ended up coming to it, which was kind of nice. Other than that, that's about it on calling school. I still do caller schools. In fact, I did more caller schools than I'm still doing training up here in Alberta. Since I moved, I do more now than when than calling because of COVID. Okay, let's see. What do we got here? Okay, so here we are. How long, how long did it take you from calling zero to how I got into challenge calling at all? Back then, we had club level. There was about 75 basics. Teacup chain was on the mainstream list. Okay, cross trail through. Um, oh, a few different calls that we no longer have at mainstream. But anyhow, when I went full time, it was kind of funny because most everybody danced at night. I had a few senior groups here and there, but it was like I thought I got to do something more. I can't just sit around the house here writing because I don't write choreography. Well, I not for mainstream anyhow. For the challenge levels, I would write, but doing classes, I didn't write. I just you know how to do the call. You just call the call. Um, but I didn't know anything about this other stuff. There's Cotman, Gully, Hodgson. Ross Howell was just starting into it. Um, there's about a half a dozen guys that were recognized as the challenge callers. Each one had their own list. So if you're going to dance to them, you would get their tapes. Make sure you knew their calls because there are a thousand different calls to look at. And then New England did finally come out with some listing, which was huge and quite a few different lists for different levels. But anyhow, I knew about uh, a guy who was doing what they called tape dancing, and it was a higher level. They called it challenge. There wasn't advanced at the time. And I said, "Well, can I come and watch?" They said, "Sure, sure, come on." So it was at somebody's house, and they had two squares, and so I'd go and I'd watch, and they'd all these new magic words. So I would furiously write down these names and all, trade circulate. Wow, that looked great. That's a cool call. Write that down. And I'd go home and I'd look these things up in Burleson's and push my checkers through them to see what they did and how they worked. And one week they were doing scoot and weave. And I thought, scoot and weave. Okay, so I'll look that up. Well, there is in Burleson they don't have scoot and weave. They have anything and weave. How would I know that? I'm not going to look under A for a scoot back call, and it didn't look like a weave the ring at all. So I went back that next week and I said, "What is this scoot and weave thing? How the heck does that work? I can't find it in the books." They explained it, and I thought, "Oh." And then we're doing a call called quarter through. Well, it turns out there's quarter through, there's one quarter through, and there's some other quarter through. There's like three definitions, and so I asked the next week. I said, "Well, how do you know which one to do?" They said, "Oh, we only use one." They explained. So after about 3 months, one of the guys was missing, and he said, "Joe, you can fill in." I said, "Well, I'm not ready to try it, actually move." And then they said, "No, no, we'll push you. Just watch for hand signals, and we'll point your way." And they started including me automatically, week after week. So I learned how to dance. Um, I'd say it took me a year to get up to three A anyhow. They were doing 3B, and I pretty well did all that. But don't forget, I would, that was my job, was practicing. So I would write the choreography and I push my checkers through and everything else, and I would dance because they let me record the things. I would dance one person just like we do now on Zoom, um, and then they got to a point where they said, "Well, Joel, could you work up some stuff for us? We need to practice." And they gave me a list of calls they wanted to practice. So I started doing that, and then I started. By that time, we did have advanced, and it was all one list. And so I started the first advanced club in the Albany area in New York. And then I started right in with C1, 2, 3, and um, 3A and 3B. So it was pretty fast. It was a fast learning curve for me, but um, I love choreography. It's fun. It's just to me, it's fun. And uh, I probably smile more when I'm dancing challenge than I do anything else. Calling wise, uh, it's all fun. I love seeing beginners. I love the aha look on their face when they catch on to a certain call. It's like, oh, that's what that means. That's how that works. It's great. It's and to see people's their lives change. This last winter, we had five out of the new people. I think we had probably five couples that had that aha thing of this is what we're going to do together forever. And when they left Florida for their home states and everything, that a number of them had already contacted people back home to find out where they could get involved in dancing through the rest of the year. And to me, that's the name of the game. To give them something to become addicted to, just like us. Okay, I've got a question here. Yeah, Steve Potter says, "What was your most embarrassing moment calling, and my proudest moment calling?" Okay, well, the most embarrassing. There's a lot of embarrassing moments. Um, Not always for me. Let me see. Um, oh yeah. Okay, you can't play with words. If you try to do playing with words, you're bound to say that they're going to sneak out on the mic. And I had no intention of calling it, but you know how you weave the ring, and when you meet that partner, give her a swing, promenade home. Or weave the ring, and when you meet mother, give her a swing. Well, both those things were going through my mind as they were weaving the ring. So I said, and when you meet that mother, give her a swing. And of course, it starts little by little. Someone giggles, they can't control it, they go, and then someone else giggles. And the next thing, the whole floor is just laughing. And, you know, then I end up laughing. Uh, so that was embarrassing. Um, there was a number of other things. There was times when it was more for the dancers. I had this one farm lady. She was a big lady. She could change the tractor tire without tools. She'd pick it up and throw that tire right on there. But she was all dressed up, and we were doing a flash dance at a mall out in the parking lot. And I called an 8 chain, and I remember this so well. I called an 8 chain through, and by 8 chain 4, she's starting. Her knees are really close together as she's waddling now through the square, and she's trying to keep the petty pants from falling below the rest of the outfit, apparently. And the next thing you know, she disappears out of the square, ducks down behind a couple of cars in the parking lot, emerges, flourishing these petty pants. She throws them to somebody on the crowd. She says, "Whew." Well, the elastic had given away, apparently.
Mm.
So, but that happens from time to time. Proudest moment calling. Oh man, I don't know. I know what you mean. That's a good question. I like that one. I'd have to think about that. Proudest moment calling. Well, I knew I fit really well with this one group I call down in the Catskill area. Lee Commons had a group, and this was quite a well-to-do resort area where people lived in the summertime. It was summer homes, but it was, and maybe Todd knows of Tuxedo Park. It was a millionaire's resort or summer residence type place for millionaires at the time. Anyhow, primarily Jewish people were members, and so I was calling for them. And during the breaks, the president kept coming by, and people would have to practice my name. So he kept going. He said, "Okay, it's Joe," and he go like, "Uebelacker, right? Joe Uebelacker." He got really good at it. By the end of the third tip during the break, I said, "Joe Uebelacker." I said, "You got it, Joe Uebelacker." So he gets up at the next break to introduce, make announcements and introduce me. And he does the announcements, and then he said, "Now let's have a hand for our caller tonight, Joe Uebelacker." Well, I got the biggest hand, let me tell you. His face went like really red. So yeah, I don't know. Calling together sometimes with some of the uh, name callers, you feel pretty proud that you've been accepted in some places, not everywhere apparently. Uh, but yeah, there's so many things like Todd said last week. There are so many different things that happen. Um, Calling on a stage and then you got the curtains behind you. That's great to have those curtains because sometimes you have to duck behind the curtain to recover your dignity. I know down in Louisville, I was calling for a club down there for Mike Jacobs, and there's a caller by the name of Lloyd Sparky Sparks. Big guy. He was largely built. And I don't remember. He was just getting on to doing advanced dancing. He wasn't calling it yet. And I think it was something to do with hourglasses that he was having problems with. And whatever it was, he had found something humorous about it. And he did that giggling stuff. And his giggle was real high pitched like a girl. And because he would giggle, someone else would giggle. And I twice during that night, I had to end the tip because nobody could stand up. We were just laughing at his laughing sort of a thing, at trying to do his best. So there's always those fun things. Yeah. A lot of these things you can't repeat. No. I shouldn't give it away for any of the dancers, but there's always times when the guy with the hearing aids who doesn't wear them and should will come up and say, "You sound awful," or sound is no good. So I would say, "Well, look tell you what, see if you can get get in a square up towards the front." And I said. And I would demonstratively turn my dials kind of like a spaceship, twist them. I said, this ought to help, and this will help. I said, "You dance over there somewhere in the front. I'll watch, and you let me know if it's any better. Give me a thumbs up if it's better." And inevitably, it'll be better. However, what he didn't know is I was not turning any dials. I was not changing a thing. It's just he got his attention. Whoever, that would happen. Did have a guy in one of the clubs in Vermont that I called for, Catamount Gadabouts in Bennington. This guy was deaf, and he danced very well. He could lip read, and I always wondered why he kept staring at me. I thought, I thought maybe he should join my Toronto group, because it looked like he liked me an awful lot. He stared at me so much. But it was that he was deaf. He was reading my lips and body language. So I was pretty impressed with that. Going back on the proudest moment, maybe it was when the kids in New York, I took them to a convention or a festival in Connecticut, and they had a ball. And I loved watching them, enjoy themselves. And these were high school kids, it's doing at that time what seemed like an adult activity. Um, so, other than that, I guess that's about it. What are the questions I ask? I'll have to look at my list. I could do the have you ever one. Have you ever ridden a motorcycle? Of course, yeah. I race motorcycles. I haven't jumped out of a plane. In fact, it's funny because even as a kid, I always wanted to fly. It didn't have to be in a plane. I could just, fly. I thought it'd be a great thing, but the only way to do it at that time was probably in a plane. However, I found out I'm afraid of flying. And what it is I'm not afraid of flying. I'm afraid of the lack of control. Like when I used to fly at first commercially, I would always try to pick a seat near the wing. Figured, I could pull that thing, I could get out on the wing, I could fix it. I don't know. But anyhow, I ended up taking flying lessons. That's, like I say, I met my wife, and we did some flying together. And when we decided to get married, we thought it should be something along the lines of aviation because that's how we met. And but we didn't think, a little Cessna 150 was going to really do the bill. you had room for two people, that was it, and then you had to really like each other to fly in those little airplanes. So we had planned a trip to Oshkosh fly-in, big aviation fly-in in the summer, and it turned out that down in Middlefield, Ohio, the next week was National Hot Air Balloon Championships. So we said, well, let's go there. So we got the itinerary, and it had the last Sunday night, 6 o'clock, wedding in flight. So they had contact numbers and all. So I called. I said, do you have somebody already for that? I said, is there a waiting list or anything? No, we haven't got anybody. Do you want to do it? I said, yeah. So lady said, well, send us your bios and we'll set it up. So they put us up at the staff headquarters hotel sort of thing. The chief of police had a classic convertible car that he would pick us up, take us to the fairgrounds, drive right up to the balloon. Boom. We go out with a bunch of balloons, and they found a guy that would marry us, and it turned out to be a local judge who didn't do kooky weddings, but he said he always wanted to fly in a hot air balloon, so he'd do this one. So we found a place that did costumes, and we rented an 1880s era outfits. My wife had the fancy dress with a big bustle and a big fancy hat thing. I had a what the heck were those things? A wool tuxedo, the old-fashioned one with the top hat and all. So we were dressed like the around the world in 80 days type of outfits. And at first they were going to put us up in a balloon it was a John Deere tractor balloon. And I kind of called and said, that doesn't sound very romantic. Can we get a different kind of balloon? So we did. We got a guy who was, I don't know if he's a state policeman or whatever, and his balloon was called Indian Summer, which was sort of fitting for our situation. And so we flew in the hot air balloon, got about 400 feet off the ground there. The judge did his ceremony with a wireless mic, and all that. And we were front page news for pretty much every state newspaper going. The next morning, about phone started ringing about 6 o'clock in the morning. Can we do an interview? Can we do an interview? Blah blah blah. So a lot of our friends and square dancers and all they contacted us and said, "What are you guys doing? You're crazy." So anyhow, yeah, I have. Um, yeah, I probably do have some pictures. I don't have them on this computer, so I can't show you. But if you get a chance to fly in a hot air balloon, it's great because once the wedding part was over, then we went up to several thousand feet and all, and it's like being on the ground as far as communications goes. We'd fly over people's houses and there'd be kids out there with a big sheet in the lawn saying, "Land here, land here," and it's talking to them. You're not shouting. You talk just like they're right next to you. It was amazing. Anyhow, we flew over the local prison, and the judge begged the pilot to keep going. He said, "There's a lot of guys down there who are there by my hand." He said, "I don't want to land in the prison. It would not be good." But it was fantastic. Oh, and we had our two youngest sons with us. I had Todd, and he was, I think, probably six. No, somewhere around 6 or 8. And Russ, who was Gail's youngest son, and he must have been about 10, something like that. And how she had done T-shirts up like tuxedos and all. They went up in a separate balloon that a heart doctor, heart surgeon had, and his balloon was called Heartthrob. So they got a chance to go up in a balloon as well. So that was fun. I never scuba dived. I did snorkel. When I was on Guam, there was a little dinky island south of Guam. Now, Guam was about 4 miles wide and 6 miles long. And the top half of the island was the Anderson Air Force Base, where they were flying the B-52s to bomb Vietnam. So this island south of a very small island already. When I say small, it was small. Anyhow, a friend of mine was a scuba dive teacher and everything with the civil service, and he said, "Come on, let's go snorkel." So I tried it. So I'm down there looking at these tropical fish, beautiful. All of a sudden, he grabs my wrist and he points up, and he dragged me to the surface. And of course, I'm thinking shark right away. So I did the famous walking on water routine, and my heart's going like boom, boom, boom. I said, "Where is it? Where is it?" And he said, "Where's what?" I said, "The shark." He said, "There's no shark here." He said, "Did you see the fish?" There was beautiful fish. Well, thank you. I haven't snorkeled since. Well, I have. I did it in Hawaii once, but I haven't scuba dived. So I'm not sure I can do that now. We'll work on that. Have I ever worked in a factory? Yeah, I started working in a factory when I was 15. Put myself through school doing mostly that. Although I did have a swing band in high school that we played a lot of weekend gigs. It paid better than the factory work did, but the factory work was money. So yeah, by the time I was 15, working in the factory, I worked at a little country store clerking. Worked at a bar cleanup. 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd close down. I'd go wash their windows, clean the bar, take the bottles out, that kind of stuff. So I was always a workaholic anyhow. Pulled taffy. Yes, I have pulled taffy. I've not been in the armed forces. They kept making rules to keep me out. First off, I was too young. Then I was a teacher. They didn't want teachers. Then I became a dad. They didn't want parents at that time. We were low on the totem pole. So every time I turned around, I was getting exempted from the service. hindsight, it would have been a great choice for me. I know I would have loved it, and would have worked out great. I was because I repaired band instruments. The Navy contacted me on Guam and said, "Would you be available to teach and kind of run our music program?" It's actually the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marines, the Army, and the Air Force all together, because there weren't enough people on the island to support a band in any one group, so they all combined together. So anytime someone important came in the South Pacific, their band would be the band to play. So I did that, and they designated me as a civilian. I forget what it was called, but I was not civil service, but I was a civilian armed forces person. Have I ridden a horse? Yep, I had horses. The whole story with those things. Do I wish I was taller or shorter? Definitely would like to have been taller. I hate to tell you guys or gals that as you get older, you actually lose height. I've lost about 3 inches. I was 5'9". I'm about 5'6" now. So I'm interested if anybody has a pair of used high heel shoes that look good on a guy. I'm interested.
Got some from the ship, Joe, that Cher wore.
Yeah, yeah. I'd have to have some sort of security for that. Have I played an instrument on stage? Yeah, many times. I didn't start. Well, I taught myself piano. We always had a piano or one of the pump organs in the house. My mom played piano. I would watch her fingers, and then when nobody was looking, I would try to do that. And eventually, I taught myself how to read music and play piano. And then my oldest sister got a trumpet that she never played, so I inherited it, but I could not figure it out until I finally, in junior high school, grade 7, they actually taught band instruments in school. Can you believe it? Wow. So I said, yeah, I want to learn how to play this trumpet. Well, the trumpet had a smashed up bell. It was awful. But the guy taught me how to play trumpet. I ended up being in the senior band in grade 9. And I practiced like 25 hours a day on that trumpet. And it was the music department was neat. If you had a good music department, you got away with murder. You know, you could get a pass to go anywhere. I would get a pass, and I would go to the music room, and I'd pick an instrument out of the racks and learn how to play it. So I learned how to play pretty much all the brass instruments. And then there was an oboe. Nobody played oboe. Had an orchestra. Nobody played oboe. So I said, can I take the oboe out and learn how to play it? So teacher gave me the book, beginner book on playing oboe. So I learned how to play oboe, played oboe in the high school orchestra. Then in grade 10, I was offered a second chair position with the Rochester Philharmonic. So I did that through high school. But I wasn't going to go on to university. I was going to, I guess I was going to stick with the motorcycle business and do that. And my peers all said, no, you got to go to university. You got to have a backup. And they said, well, I can't afford, I haven't got money to do that. And they said, oh, there's all kinds of grants and loans and blah, blah, blah. And so the music teacher and the band teacher, the choral teacher, and the chemistry teacher, the only 3 teachers I cared about in high school, only three that really seemed to care what happened to me, they all conspired to get me to do an audition for university. So I picked a solo to play, and I went and I jumped the hoops. They um, they accepted me. So I went to school for music performance, and tacked onto that was music education, uh, bachelor of science degree in education. And it wasn't until my final year when I went out and practice taught, came home the first day, and I said to my wife, I said, "Do you know what I'm doing? I'm going to be a teacher. I hate school. I hate, I didn't like the teachers. I didn't like that lack of control. And here I was going to become a teacher." I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." And I loved it. It's you know, especially the first job was like real family. So that's what got me into uh, teaching music. I went back and did another degree in uh, what was in music. It was composition, and I majored on trumpet and minored on voice and piano. So, uh, you know, motorcycles and music. That's what I cared about growing up. And then I got hooked into the square dance thing. Holy cow! So what else we got? Yeah, being a teacher, you have control. You do have control, but you don't need it. You know, if you care about the kids, and I guess that carried over into the square dance calling too. You know, if you care about the people, you realize these people are coming in from their various lives to the dance. Some of them might have argued on the way there, and they're not talking to each other. Others can't wait until the dance is over; they can go home and talk to each other. Um, so you've got to appreciate that. You got to be in part of the moment. Uh, Carrie says, "Do I have in compositions I can share?" Yeah, I do. I've got a number. Uh, just before I left Ontario, one of the concert bands I was in was having a 15-year anniversary, and they commissioned me to write a piece for their 15th year anniversary thing. And then I've written a number of different things. I wrote a piece for my one granddaughter's wedding. Wrote some music for a round dance for my wife's birthday a couple of years ago. But yeah, I can send some of that stuff. I've written some for local bands out here as well, but it's fun. It just happens. I remember I did a motorcycle trip cross country back in 1965, before some of you were born, and I stopped and visited with an uncle and aunt in St. Paul, and I remember definitely hearing at night. I could hear a complete orchestra in my head, and I thought, "No, I'm going crazy." I opened the window. I look out there. I thought, "Where is that music coming from?" It was in my head. So from time to time, that's what happens. Complete pieces of music that doesn't come out on the keyboard the way I hear it, which is fine. So it just, for me, it just happens. Actually, the one that I did the commission for Ontario, for the band, I think I started around 10 o'clock at night. I had one little theme, and by 2 o'clock I had written the whole piece. And the neat thing was I got to conduct it for the concert. What are my favorite and least favorite square dance calls? I don't think I have a least favorite call. I love them all. They're like my kids. I think one of the nicest ones we've ever had is Relay the Doocy. Everybody moves and it dances very pretty. There's no backing up or anything else, and if everybody dances it, actually dances it, it should feel like floating on air. But there's a lot of concepts at the challenge level I really love. So I guess that's about that. From what we've heard from these interviews, callers were able to make a good living from calling it. Is it the same nowadays? No. Back when I started doing it, it yeah, it paid very well. I won't say it paid very well, but if you worked your butt off, you could make a lot of money. And the thing is, you don't realize you're doing it at the time, I think. But I was full time. When I say I was a full time caller, I was a full time caller. I called nearly 364 days a year. It was like, in that respect, I guess it was a job. But it didn't matter how much your head hurt or how physically exhausted you were. Once you got behind the mic, then people started dancing. You come alive. So but you'll call it a dance. You may call it a dance for your local group for $50 on a Monday night because you only have two squares or whatever it is. But on the weekend, you may be calling like I did the President's Ball in New Jersey one time and made $2,300. Same amount of time, and bam, So the festivals, yeah, the National Challenge convention, that was paying thousands of dollars. When we did the Advance and Challenge convention that started in Toledo, Ohio, and did that for a number of years, we were thinking, well, if we could get $500 for the whole weekend, that would be great. We walked away the first year with $1,500, and after that it was $3,000. So yeah, but you spend a lot of money too, because you got to get there and back, so you don't get to keep it all. But it's not like that today. Which good or bad, I don't know. We get callers. We still get people wanting to call. Thank goodness. And there's so many really good ones out there. I guess that's one of my declarations would be the real heroes are the guys and gals who have home clubs. They're not fancy callers necessarily. They don't get asked to do festivals necessarily. They don't get a lot of club dates from other clubs, whatever. But they're there every week teaching people how to dance. And it's a social situation. They're having fun. And those are the people that... And it's harder to call for the same group week after week after week. And to be fresh. It's kind of hard. So, anyhow, that's... What am I doing now? Okay, I thought I'd be sort of semi-retired when we moved to Alberta because, we had sold our home, we had gone full-time RVing, then COVID hit, so we decided we better get someplace we can stay warm in the winter. In Canada, that's not really easy, so we bought a condo here, downsized the RV, and I joined the local Callers Association, and I've been busy ever since. I do a lot of the training for the provincial convention here. I'm program chairman for the national convention that's coming up next year, and I sure hope the callers that tune in are able to make it out here. There is so much to do out here in the Calgary area. It's gorgeous. The mountains are just to the west. Some days they look like they're a mile away. Other days they look like they're 50 miles away. But it's geographically it's gorgeous. Cochrane is neat because it's down in the river valley. And in the morning, if it's like even in the winter, it's like a snow globe, especially at early morning when before it really gets to be light, and you have the lights coming on or going off down in the valley, and the snow coming down. It's really pretty. So another question we got here from Steve: who are callers you wish you could have called with, and or danced to that you never got to? Um, I didn't do that much with the West Coast. Um, Most of the West Coast callers that I worked with were calling with me in the East Coast, but I never got a chance to dance with Gary Shoemaker, Kenny Bauer. Um, Jerry Haig came east quite a bit. That was good. That was fun. Um, Calling with, I would have loved to have called with any of them, but I like to call with anybody. It's fun, the repartee that you develop, um, especially if you're not competitive, you aren't trying to show off. You're just trying to make it a fun experience and have a good time. Uh, that to me is, I don't, you don't have to be a national caller or a regional caller or international or anything else. You just you just gotta have a mic in your hand. And if if you're open to it, we're gonna have a ball. We'll enjoy ourselves, and the dancers love it. Even when you get two callers on stage who don't sing that well together, but they sing they sing a singing call together. It's special. I don't know what it is, but it is special. Some of the callers I did get to call with or dance to first off that I really liked was Dick Jones, Dave Taylor, Jerry Helt, Jack Lasry. I always liked Ross Howell's challenge calling. One caller who has become known very much for his challenge calling, who I remember I was calling in Charlotte, North Carolina, for an advanced group. And this guy kept coming up in the breaks asking me, well, could you do this with that call? Could you do this? How about that? What's the rule for this? And most of you are going to know the name. Ben. Now, what the heck is his last name?
Rubright.
Rubright, thank you. Isn't that awful? One of those senior moments. Yeah, Ben Rubright, yeah. Um, and he went on to become, one of the best challenge callers there is. Brilliant mind. Um, I've called callers that I've enjoyed calling with. Jack Lasry was one. Super gracious guy, just fantastic. Jerry Schatzer out of Connecticut. Always enjoyed calling with Jerry. Jerry was a just all around good caller, nice singing calls, everything else, and a definite musician. There wasn't a piece of music on a record at that time that he didn't know what to do with. If it was a bass drum, kick drum, there he'd make choreography fit so it kicks you in the butt and made you weave the ring just right. It's just so many things like that. Other than that, I do remember Lee Common was funny because I've called. Yeah, I guess I've called with Lee, Cherry Ridge a little bit. But we were doing a national convention one time, and he was the MC, and I think it was a C1, and usually I got asked to do singing calls at the last part of any hour I had or half hour or whatever, because they would request me to yodel, and So he was on stage, sitting on off to the side, talking to some other people while I was calling. And then I put on my singing call, and as soon as I started yodeling, I could feel a presence over on my side. He's over there looking at the record, going around and around as if the record was doing the yodeling. I don't think he was sure. Um, so I got done, and everybody claps, and he picks a record off. He says, he looks me straight in the eye, as honest as anything, and he says, "How do you do that?" What do I tell him? I said, "You can't." I think we stayed friends after that. Um, in fact, if you haven't heard the yodeling, let me see, do I have one here? I'll just, I think this will come through. This is the last verse of Rocky Mountain Fling. Don Franklin was a great yodeler.
Juvenile mental left with a corner. Run back and swing your date. Side space, grand square.
That's some of the stuff I do. Okay. Okay. Did I ever use any of my own compositions for square dancing, for a singing call? No, but I've, some people have written, um, like a local guy here wrote a song called "The Art of the Square," and it's a neat little, about a 7 lyric song, and he wanted music for it. I've put some music to it. Haven't finished yet, but it's pretty well finished. I just have to orchestrate it properly. And then let me see. Dave Enall says, "I told Dave that we were your favorite callers to work with. What the heck? Ha ha." Well, one of my superpowers is I'm a good liar.
Ah,
You
there
know?
you go.
Yeah, Dave and I, we've worked together. Uh, Todd and I know we've been on the same staff different times. In fact, the last time Todd and I were on the same staff was in July at the Gay College Convention in Seattle.
Okay, I'll ask him that question.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It was a question Dave had earlier, but I'll ask you.
Okay.
Um, you know, uh, Dave really didn't work with you much live, but seeing you a lot on Zoom. And every time you start a tip on Zoom, you say bow to the partner and bow to the caller. And we were wondering if when you call live, do you make your dancers bow to you before you'll start calling for them?
Yeah, and they have to take a shower.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, bottle the collar, something like that. Yeah, well, we've worked a few times together. We're up at Dave's place there in Bank, and but now how's this square that's all coming, Dave?
It needs work. Look at the roof behind me. It's
Yeah.
But listen, I got a question for you that I may have to explain after, but let me just ask the question anyway.
Okay.
Have you ever, okay, in your life, sold a chair for top dollar that when the person got it home, it just basically fell apart and hasn't been usable since?
Never did. Well, there was this one green one.
Oh, okay. I got to tell you, I use that chair to this day.
Do you? That's
Oh yeah,
good.
it was fantastic, especially when I lost my leg. It was just I was sleeping in it. It was fantastic.
Oh,
Just so
that's
you know, when Joe moved, just so everybody knows, when Joe moved from Ontario um, to Calgary, I was there was a chair in his basement, and every time he had a dance in his basement, I claimed that chair and would just lay back in it. And anyway, when he ended up moving, we bought the chair off him.
Yeah, yeah. Mary secretly got that as a, I think it was a birthday present, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Yep. Hmm.
excellent. If you had waited a little longer, you could have got my father-in-law's. It would stand you upright, actually.
Yeah, we had one of those for Mary's dad. The thing that worried me was I thought she was going to buy your old mattress, and I didn't want that.
Oh, lordy. Yeah, way it goes. Anyhow, it's been one heck of a ride. It's like Daryl Clendenin had said on his. Um, he became addicted with the calling, and for some of us, I know that's true. You know, I did. It consumed my time. I wrote a number of calls. I always wrote calls that made sense, though. They were used to reinforce other calls. Like people didn't cross trail through properly at the time. They would always go to the corner alum and left. So I wrote a call from lines of four where you did a cross trail through centers, trade and roll, ends, cross, fold and roll. I can't remember it exactly. And the thing is, since they were wandering anyhow on cross trail through, I figured I'd call that wander yonder. And they would. They would wander yonder. Um, Another one I made was that people didn't cast off three quarters very well. They, if they were counting walls, they didn't know which wall to start counting with, or whatever, or they just having a hard time. So, from a quarter take, say heads past the ocean, um, there's a center person in that wave facing someone on the outside. So I would have them pass through, and then whoever they met on the outside, they would trade and roll. So they were looking at each other. The person coming into the middle made a two-faced line. They could cast off three quarters. The flow was great, and it could zero out really easily. So since there was the first part of it was passing through, I called it, and people would do this. They didn't even have to know how to do the call. They would do what I told them. It was called make a pass. And even if they didn't know how to do it, they would make a pass, regardless. Um, so on Caller Lab list, probably no Caller Lab list. Most of mine are C3, C4, shortcut, touch and go. Um, the 9 times slide through. As far as I know, I was the first one to come up with that, and it became a concept called crazy, which means do the call as many times as you can. So if you do a crazy square through, you know you would square through until you ran out of people, but you set it up just right, and you could do nine. I think it was 9 slide throughs, and I brought it out at the National Convention in Detroit. It would have been somewhere in the second part of the 80s, and I was in the C1 hall, and of course it was uh, the last part of the day, so all the challenge callers came in and sat in the bleachers so they could razz me when I did my singing call, yodeling, um, and I brought that up, and as soon as I did that, I see them all pull out their little notebooks, going, see, slide through, slide through, slide through, figuring out how to do that. But that brings up, it wasn't embarrassing, but it was a crazy moment at the Advanced and Challenge Convention in Toledo one year. C1 hall, and I was going to do the singing call, the yodeling call, and as I started into it, the double doors in the back of the hall open up, and John Sabelski and Dave Tenney and Tim Scholl, a couple other callers, they come in and they're parting the dancers like Moses parting the sea, and all, and stop, stop. And they're yelling, hold it, hold it, hold it. And they come up, they took my mic away, they put me up in the air and carried me out of the hall. I'm laying back looking at the ceiling, and they said, no more yodeling. But if Dave Tenney was in the hall, he'd always, as soon as I do his thing, he'd say, even before I do it, during a tip I'm calling, a dance, a challenge, whatever it was, you'd hear Dave Tenney going, I hope he doesn't yodel again. Thanks, Dave. So, anyhow. So it's been a ball. By the way, has anybody got February open this next year? They can go down to the Florida Keys and call for for a month. Need a caller down there for February. Housing paid. Email me if you need it. Anyhow, well, thanks, folks, for tuning in. And I'm looking at doing possibly some Saturday late afternoon, sort of evening sessions, so we can get more of Australia and Japan. Some of the callers from there on. So if I do that and you can't show up because you're calling a dance or you're not home or whatever, they would go to YouTube for sure. Oh yeah, crazy. Yeah, that's right. It's everybody does a call, centers do the call. Everybody does a call, centers do the call. Oh! I got a cramp in my leg. That's not good. Yeah, you're right. That's the crazy. What the heck was the one I was talking about?
I think
I
it's
like
just
that
like
call.
funny slide through as many times as you can.
Funny. There we are. Funny. Yeah. 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 You know, that's why I love the challenge calls and the concepts. The thing is, you got to be careful. You can do a secondly stingy, thirdly greedy, whatever. We haven't got a greedy concept. I'm working on it. Uh, um, you know, mirror image this, and you can put all these suffixes and prefixes together. Then you say go, and the one that always it still catches me today is catch. When you do a catch anything, you do the anything call, and then you have to finish the catch. And I'm so happy that I've remembered all that stuff the caller just said to do instead of the regular catch, that I forget to finish the original call. I'm like, yay. Usually the caller then says, don't forget to finish the call. So you didn't see my question about your poetry inclinations. Oh, no, I didn't, did I? Oh, at the start of this, I mentioned I could read a poem. Have you written any poems? If you if so, can you read one? I don't do original poetry for the most part. Not that I can divulge. Some of I love Ogden Nash though. Candy is dandy, liquor is quicker.
Yeah,
Um,
I've heard some of your limericks, Joe. I don't want to hear them either.
Once was a caller named Joe.
Yeah.
And I don't remember.
didn't have much dough. Uh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's part of the improvisation on the other side of the mic is when you can make up words. Like I'm famous for forgetting words to singing calls. It could be singing calls that I've done like for the last 6 months because they're my favorite, and then all of a sudden they're gone. So then you got to come up with something. Um, and usually it's stupid. But anyhow, well, we've gone over time here, folks. I don't want to. I don't want to ruin. I don't want to ruin your day any more than I have. But it's been fun, and I might, I don't think I'll ever say I'm going to retire. I might semi-retire or cut back or whatever. Um,
Thank you, Joe. You were very patient doing YouTube or videoing A2 with us and teaching us. And I really appreciate that. I've continued, and you would be amazed at my progress.
that's good. Well,
Just
it's,
how many instruments do you actually play? I know there's a lot. How
oh
many?
Lord, I don't know, must be about 30.
Yeah, amazing
Yeah.
talent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Zoom was really a godsend.
Yes,
And
it still
it still
is.
is. Yep,
It
it
still
still
is.
is.
For those of us who went to our first real dance
Yeah,
after coming back from Mexico and getting COVID,
yeah.
hey, Zooms for me.
Right.
I didn't like that COVID. No, thank you.
No, no.
And we won't wear masks, so
Yeah, that's
I
it.
don't know if they help, but yeah, I like
Well,
Zoom.
well, I have slowed down recently, and it's only for a limited amount of time, I'm hoping. When I got back from Florida this winter, um, got back on a Monday night. Gail unloaded the truck for the most part because I got out of breath just walking into the house carrying a couple of things. And so I guess we had supper, went to bed. About 5 o'clock in the morning, I got up to go to the bathroom and I collapsed and ended up spending the next week in the hospital. So very severe internal bleeding. So I'm the medication is tough. I'm on medication. It just tires me out like crazy. I'll be glad when the medication is done. But there's stuff that just makes me sleepy, dizzy, drowsy. Not allowed to drive for a while. So Gail's been taking fantastic care of me. So that's why we haven't been out dancing now.
But it wasn't COVID.
Oh no, no.
No,
This was internal injuries. So,
maybe I'd rather have the COVID.
well, we did have COVID before we left for.
Yeah, I know you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't know what it does to you long term, unfortunately. But this was
It takes a while. I was falling asleep just sitting reading and all. I've never fallen asleep sitting up, especially in an airplane. But I would just fall asleep on the couch. I like,
yeah.
what's this? Like, yeah.
Dave, I've seen Dave do it on the mic.
Davino?
Both of us.
Both of them.
That's when we got a reputation for sleeping together.
Yeah.
Ah,
Kind
good thing you cleared that up.
of show is this anyway?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Anyway, I gotta go, Joe, because Toronto is going to kick Edmonton tonight in the CFL. So
Oh.
everybody wants to see that.
Okay.
I really want to see Toronto beat up on an Alberta team.
Okay. Well, I'll put this up on YouTube. I'll probably cut out most of it.
Huh, why?
No,
Oh, good stuff.
I'll put it up. Oh, next week. Okay, who we got next week? Oh, um, oh, where did I put that? Here we are.
You'll send it to us.
I will. Oh,
You're very good that way.
Todd, Steve, Mike Seastrom. Oh, well, next week there's nothing, so we've got a week off. And Mike
4th of
Seastrom.
July.
Mike's a dentist and very, very good caller. Good leader. So he'll have some he'll have some good interesting stuff. Well, thanks for staying and contributing, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Thanks,
Good
Joe.
interview.